I'll be honest, finding the good about the bad seasons of Power Rangers is pretty difficult. It's really hard to keep yourself subjective when rewatching things that you don't like. Before recent seasons, Wild Force was probably the most maligned out of the Saban era shows. One culprit being how well received Time Force was. Any season coming after that show would have been heavily criticized. On top of this big hurdle, the show was sold off to Disney, so it was in a state of, are we canceled? What should we do? This in return scrapped some of the more interesting stories that were originally planned by the writers. The production crew ended up being on autopilot, so Jonathan Secor started his patented copying of Super Sentai right out at the beginning. While I've said in the past, PR can copy episodes or ingrained plot points. That's not an issue when you don't do it a lot. There are times you can't get around that, and Japan has come up with many good plots to use, which is why Time Force is very close to Time Ranger. But time travel stories are pretty much universal. Gal Ranger is much more harder to swallow for PR. It's tonally different. When the last time that happened, we got Turbo and it didn't know what to do with itself. But even after all the stuff that was going on behind the scenes, they did come up with interesting concepts, much more than in later seasons like Super Mega Force.
William Merrick.
Merrick isn't that special. We've had the whole evil ranger before. Lost over a set amount of time, he converts and saves the rangers, then becomes one himself. Willie, the bar/pool table owner, adds the extra dimension to Merrick's story. Willie serves the season fair, unlike other characters like Kendall. He answers some of the small questions. Where does Merrick live? He can't be around Princess Shayla for personal reasons. Loosely shows his love of pool, which helps out in future episodes. Gives a second look at Merrick being a good guy by helping out Willie with some idiots that cause problems in the store, and he's just a perfect everyday down-to-earth guy. When the Zords were taken by Animus, his place even helped Merrick cope with the issue, since he's the lone wolf and doesn't want to open to his team to show weakness. Now, what season did this again? It was called Super Mega Force, except there, they didn't bother giving Orion anything to do. We get this one throwaway scene of him living in the school, and that's it. This is where I have issues with Neo Saban seasons. Things like this show they don't really care. Where's the fish out of water stuff? The Aquatarians got to do more stuff in 10 episodes than Orion accomplished in the same amount of time. I can't even count that forced friendship with him and Ernie either, since it was never on screen.
Cole's backstory.
You can hate the Cole character all you want, that's justified. Cave-like people rarely work out. It was a miracle that Koda was good. They're just done either over the top, like Jan and Geki Ranger, or annoyingly dumb like Cole. But I can't deny that his family's backstory is the best thing that came out of Wild Force. It was a mystery from start to finish. His parents were killed, it wasn't implied, we saw the tombstones. This is the perfect level of realism a kid's show should strive for. It answers to how he got raised by these nomads, has an overall connection to the main villain, like how Cam and his father relate to Lothar. It gives him a very powerful emotion to fight Master Org, along with overcoming obstacles from each of the monsters. We get not one, but two payoffs with Master Org. Cole directly fights him earlier in the season, then finishes him off at the end. It doesn't stop there. Cole shows even though he had no choice but to kill Master Org, he doesn't violate his character of caring for all life and pays respect to Victor Adler. This is a basic character arc. All fans want PR are ideas like this, not Troy stuff where the writers abandoned pretty much the few things the character had going for him. Unless your goal was for me to not care about the Red Ranger, then they did a good job.
The pollution subplot.
When we're not finding out the secrets of Cole's family or the 4,000th time Max says never give up, Wild Force had a secondary story about pollution being the creation of the orgs. PR has focused on this type of moral lesson before and it doesn't get preachy. I did have my issues with Animus/Kite, but it was an interesting way to explain why all the monsters in Wild Force were really odd mishmash of parts. Some seasons don't really explain where their motif comes from, or Sentai footage doesn't make sense after something was changed for PR story. Wild Force ties them together. Victor Adler finds the seeds of the original Master Org. He decides to turn evil after being rejected by other people, which is what the monsters are made up of. Rejected and thrown out junk that people didn't care about, with the major companies not doing proper disposal either. So in return, the villains of Wild Force want to get rid of the humans and take over, basically getting rid of them in the trash.
US weapons and gear.
PR usually adds in a lot of stuff that's not in Sentai. Wild Force did a good job in the design area. I enjoyed the battleizer that Cole got, it being the first based off one of the Zords with all the features of the Falcon. The jungle weapons are based off the auxiliary Zords, combining into a second team weapon, which Japan always seems to not want to do. They'll create all these extra mechas, animals, and other stuff, but nothing else links up to them, then just spitting out the next new thing, not wanting to expand on established stuff, most famously the Ostrich and Gosager. There's no Titanus Ranger in MMPR, there's no weapons for the Aux Swords and Dino Thunder. Gal Ranger only had Gal Silver own a bike originally. This is what I like about PR. The show is there to sell you toys, and they do make stupid things that they shouldn't do, like the Transtech armor, those semi-trucks. But Wild Force shows that they can be creatively positive for the series. It's one of the seasons I can appreciate the additions from the US side.
Internal villain conflict.
Changing villains mid-season is a mixed bag. Sometimes it works, like in Zeo. Other times, like in Megaforce, it's all over the place. The one thing that the writers usually do is just default the bad guys to complaining about each other. They'll hate how one does things, like Korag's honor being poked at all the time, while Mordecai hasn't done a better job himself. I mean, you are saying your master did a bad call in creating Korag if you're complaining about him. I don't think he'd be happy about that. Wild Force gave decent reasons why the leaders kept going in and out and why leaders weren't being trusted. Master Aura didn't want anyone to find out he wasn't the original one, so he had to make a fake horn and eye while he was building up his power. He left other people in charge. That was a creative way for dealing with the Gal Ranger footage. Not only that, this dot was confusing Jindrax and Toxica. They wanted to follow a master, but each one got progressively worse, and using them as cannon fodder to the point of killing Toxica as a freaking ruse. Instead of the Rangers defeating the generals with some last-minute power-up, they got killed or used by Master Oregon covering up his true identity, or giving him items he needed. So not only does he want to wipe out humanity, he really doesn't even care about the orcs. He's pretty much the enemy for the entire planet. This was an improvement over Gal Ranger, where the generals didn't really feel like leaders, but a couple of strong imposing minions that just got thrown out after emotional breaks or power-ups by the heroes. This kept it fresh and made Master Org really important.
The extra Zords.
Wild Force started the whole, let's start making extra Zords so they have other things to buy and cross-combined with. I'm not against that as long as each thing has a purpose in the show. The season gave pretty decent episodes revolving around each Zord. The elephant, which was not released in the US, was trapped inside a mountain. The Giraffe Zord was hidden in a crane. The Deer Zord was Princess Shayla's friend / pet. You get the idea. They had some sort of backstory, which gives me a reason to want them. But in recent seasons of PR, they have been seriously lacking with any explanation. All the power-ups given for the legendary Megazord were all crappily done, except for Casey's episode. There's no reason for me to want the Mini-Zord from Ninja Storm or the Dragon from Mystic Force if you don't have the characters that were a part of those series. They didn't even bother to get Mini-Zord's voice actor back. I have no connection or care. Then Ninja Steel pulls the extreme where they totally ignore the Alien Ranger and Ninja Storm powers in the source footage. So we see those attacks and no one gives two craps about them. Kids have no idea what those were and that they had an important meaning for the show's history. We need more episodes like what was done in Wild Force for these Zords to have a meaning. PR half the time feels like an unstoppable train that can't be slowed down. It has to go, it has to reach its destination, then just move to the next stop with a response of, oh well, I'll try next time.
Zords are more than tools.
I never liked that most of the PR seasons treat the Zords as tools. Yes, they are tools to help them with giant fights. And I know not all the seasons make the Zords alive, but these characters would care about them a lot, seen like in MMPR season 1 through 3. When we watch Back to the Future, we care about 3 things: Doc, Marty, and the DeLorean. When the DeLorean was run over by the train at the end of part 3, you feel bad. Which is why I love that Wild Force respected the Zords. They went through a ton of stuff, from being controlled by Lion Tamer Org, to fighting their friends with Zanaku in control of the Predazord. It gave that extra conflict, and they were all killed off at the end of Wild Force by Master Org, so it gave that extra oomph when they were revived. I just want to see some remorse when the Rangers lose a Zord, or forced to self-destruct one like in RPM. We all remember Kim when the Thunder Zords were lost. That's one of her best moments.
Master Org.
For being an original main villain, even though they took his outfit from Die Ranger, and for being a part of a bad season, he's in my list of villains. This is an area that I didn't feel like it was on autopilot. All the other stuff, most of the Rangers' personalities are nearly direct copies, very little growth of the characters, or the show being too preachy. That's what suffered, but Master Org was complicated. He is sick and evil. He slaughtered Cole's parents. He kills Orgs left and right. Master Org even goes out of his way to make fun of Cole. Even all that, because of Cole's naive nature of life, which is good and bad at the same time, he does convince you to look past every cliche villain trope to forgive Victor Adler, on top of which Victor turned to evil because he was basically treated as an oddity, an outcast that no one wanted. He had some justification. Not many villains get that. He's not a perfectly written character. He needed some more work, more interaction with the team, which is one of those weaknesses PR has with source footage requirements. It also comes down to the actor. Ian Volesky is not your typical PR choice of actors. He hams it up like most PR roles, but he gives off that megalomaniac vibe, something that's a little bit hidden under the robe, while other characters like Zed is pretty much straightforward. Evil, strong-willed, hates to lose, everything's open to the world, in his case literally.
Zanaku arc.
I'll be honest, I prefer the 6 Rangers, or equivalent, to start off as the villain. Not because Tommy started that. I think it's more interesting than the new guy coming in just going, "Oh hey guys, I'm here to help you out. I'll info dump my origin story later." Unless you're Cam with time travel or Gold Zeo Ranger where it gives something different, Zanaku was an interesting bad guy. He's just an evil spirit in a mask that takes control of people. It showed the desperation that Merrick had to do just to try to protect Anna Maria. He paid for it with being trapped for hundreds of years. It's more eerier than, say, Ryan. Fighting and overpowering the entire team is pretty common. You do worry about it, but Zanaku went the extra step and had control over his wild Zords. Plus, he easily stole the other ones. Ryan was badass in Lightspeed Rescue. He was almost unstoppable. Imagine he broke into the Aqua base and got control of the Rescue and Super Trained Megazords by kidnapping Miss Fairweather. They'd be royally screwed. Trent also falls in the more menacing Evil Ranger for this too. Zanaku also gave the seriousness that Wild Force lacked. Everyone was happy-go-lucky, these monsters were pretty much pushovers, Master Org looked like an idiot. Wham! Zanaku rises from the dead, Dracula style. We get a couple of hectic months for his story. The mystery behind him wasn't bad. It was a decent payoff, a lot better than the red herring stuff with White and Gold Ranger. They even pay him off at the end of the season. He's still alive and is willing to follow Merrick as a form of redemption or penance. Zanaku is a good example of a small character that doesn't do much but has an interesting story with a good payoff. You want more from this dynamic, but at the same time, you don't feel robbed of missing something. While Keeper was in Dino Charge more than Zanaku, his complete lack of backstory and explaining him ruins his character. You pretty much don't want to see him anymore since he's just plot contrivance. I want more Zanakus than Keepers.
Taylor.
I'm not original with this number 1 choice, but Taylor is pretty much the only main character that was enjoyable on the team. I could argue Alyssa and Danny, but they didn't do all that much, normally dropped to the wayside only to fill in when Sentai plots were needed. Why do people like Taylor so much? It's because she's the most realistic to how people would act under this position. She's in the Air Force, so naturally is going to be a leader that has rules. That's a part of her nature. Granted, Cole had a point where she was too difficult treating them, but you have to see it from her perspective. Danny is emotionally weakest of the group. He cracks under very little stress. He needs to learn. She's just trying to keep everyone alive, especially Max. Max just treats this as a game. That's why she gets frustrated when they do dumb things. With the help of the other characters, Taylor did calm down and adapted her style that would work with the team. She grew as a character. They even tried to do some things with her and Eric in the Time Force team up. That's what I want from small moments. It shows that they're not just heroic people that don't feel or do anything else. When Wild Force originally came out, I did really hate it because it was the lowest point the series had. In a way, I feel sorry for it because Time Force was such a thing. There was just no way these guys were going to look good, even if they didn't copy Gal Ranger, use the characters better, make Cole not a jungle boy. It still probably wouldn't have turned out well because of our high expectations. But time heals all wounds. It also helps that there are other seasons that have done worse things, which, in hindsight, Wild Force isn't as horrible. It's still a season that I don't like, but I've grown to appreciate a lot of the things that it did do right. Do you feel the same way? Have you looked at Wild Force as being not the worst thing in the world over the years, but a decent attempt at something? Or do you still equally hate it from then and now? Next week, I'll be shifting gears and moving on to the good things about Power Rangers Turbo.